Parish priest Gabriel Rios awoke with a start in the thick darkness of his first night at the El Campo parish. His breath was rapid and cold, as if he'd been yanked from the depths of a dream to the solid ground. His t-shirt was soaked with sweat. The clock on the small table ticked steadily, 3:13 a.m. He sat bolt upright, his eyes still adjusting to the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest. Outside, the wind of the semi-desert lashed against the parish house's tin roof. But it wasn't the wind that had jolted him awake. It was the sound. 3 long, deep chimes echoing from the distance from the hill where the Santa Lucía convent stood proud amidst the dry grassland. 3 chimes, clear, unmistakable. But that was impossible. The convent's bell had been removed over 20 years ago when the place was closed and abandoned. No one lived there, no electricity, no activity of any kind. So who or what had made it ring? Gabriel clutched the rosary beads around his neck, his hands slightly trembling. He wasn't easily intimidated. For years in Africa, he'd witnessed both hunger and war buried nameless children under the scorching sun. But the sound tonight troubled him in a different way, the way of things left unsaid. Parish priest Gabriel Rios had left his homeland of Nuevo Mexico to participate in the church's international missionary program, a mission often lasting many years for young priests with strong ideals. He was sent to the southern outskirts of Africa, where the church's presence was mainly linked to humanitarian aid, educating orphaned children due to disease and war. For over 10 years, there Gabriel not only taught the gospel, but also directly took care of the aftermath for war victims, from nameless children to victims of famine. He learned to live minimally, communicate in multiple local languages, and connect deeply with communities scarred by both human sin and global indifference. However, the constant losses, coupled with lax morals and simmering conflicts within the local church ranks, led Gabriel to gradually realize the discrepancy between ideals and reality. He began to question the concept of salvation, especially when he saw many using the guise of serving God to control, manipulate, or evade responsibility. After more than a decade, when his missionary term ended, Gabriel asked to return to his homeland, not to rest, but to hear the voice of his heart again where it was born. The diocese appointed him to a small parish just a few miles from the Santa Lucía convent, almost a chance arrangement. But for Gabriel, it was the first response from God after many years of silence. The next morning, Gabriel stepped out of the parish house while the sky was still dimly lit. He went to the only small grocery store in the village, where Mrs. Rosa, the old woman who cleaned the church, was rearranging boxes. "Did you hear anything last night?" he asked, his voice gentle. Mrs. Rosa didn't look up, only shook her head slightly. "Didn't you sleep well? There was a bell, 3 chimes, from Santa Lucía." She stopped, then continued stacking the boxes as if she hadn't heard. "That convent has been abandoned for a long time. There's no one there. There are no bells." "But I'm sure, very clear." "And the time was 3:13. She said softly this time, looking up. Her eyes didn't look directly at Gabriel, but through him towards some distant memory. "Right at that time, every year someone hears it." He froze. "What do you mean?" "Not everyone hears it, but whoever hears it never sleeps peacefully again." "Has anyone ever talked about it?" Mrs. Rosa pursed her lips, then walked to the back shelf. After a long moment, she returned, placing an old, tattered Bible on the table. "This used to be in Sister Noemí's room. You were studying here once and it fell on you. Remember?" Gabriel opened the book. A small photograph fell out. It was Sister Noemí, smiling amidst a group of students. Right in the center was young Gabriel with messy black hair and shy eyes. The photograph had faded, but it hadn't blurred the warmth that once existed. Mrs. Rosa said softly, "That sister loved you like a younger brother. After they disappeared, no one dared to ask. No one was allowed to ask." Gabriel gripped the photograph tightly. 4 people. No letters, no traces. No one explained anything. "No one wanted to explain," she replied. "People just buried the voices, buried the truth." No one said anything more. Gabriel took the book back to the parish house. A feeling arose in his heart that wasn't fear, but an urge, something that had always been there since he heard the news of Sister Noemí's disappearance 20 years ago, when he was still a boy who understood nothing but emptiness. That afternoon, Gabriel drove up the hillside. The trail leading to Santa Lucía was overgrown with grass, and the jagged gravel made the car shake violently. Gabriel stopped in front of the rusted iron gate. Not locked. A wooden door hung ajar. No sounds other than the wind. But something was waiting for him inside. He pulled out a flashlight and carefully stepped through the gate. The weeds grew taller than his knees. The stone steps were crumbling. Underneath his feet, shards of glass from some window reflected the red light of the sunset. Gabriel stopped in front of the chapel door. He bent down and picked up a small object from the ground, a broken brass crucifix chain. His heart pounded not out of fear, but because of something harder to name, the cold certainty that what he had just heard was real. No one could sweep everything clean. And this place, it seemed, still remembered those who had lived in it, and who had been buried in silence. Night fell quickly in the hills. Gabriel entered the flashlight beam, sweeping across the high, dark stone pillars covered in cobwebs. The smell of half-burned candle wax mixed with the scent of dried jasmine made his heart clench. It was the distinctive smell of the chapel when Sister Noemí was teaching. That scent, like her voice, gentle but not weak, warm, like the early winter fire. The deeper he went, Gabriel's footsteps slowed. The stone floor under his feet was still intact, but no one had touched this place in a long time. On the wall, the old plaster was cracked. He stopped in front of a wall with a dent. A cross once hung there, and below it was where Sister Noemí often stood to teach the local children to read, to learn scripture. Gabriel's hand gently touched the rough brick. A small piece had been removed. Someone didn't want this place to retain any traces. He turned left into the hallway leading to the classrooms. Under the flashlight's beam, rows of dusty wooden chairs appeared, many of them rotten. But the chalkboard still had drawings, the outline of a lesson about the 10 Commandments, the last small line lost. "Thou shalt not bear false witness." Gabriel recorded everything with a small recorder worn on his chest. No need to speak loudly. He just wanted to keep every sound, every footstep touching the empty stone floor. The deeper he went, he found a locked room. The lock was rusted, but the crack in the door was wide enough for him to see a crumpled piece of paper caught on the wooden edge in the light. He gently pulled it out, just a small piece, the back printed with the words, in an old typewriter, "Technical storage room not in use since 1974. His heart stopped. Technical room, not on the current map that the diocese kept. Gabriel left the room looking for the old library. The books were rotten, many of them covered in green mold. But in the drawer of Sister Alma's desk, the former Mother Superior, he found a copy of the original convent map folded in half and stuck together by the edge of candle wax. That map clearly indicated a room below the ground floor located behind the main chapel. It said, "Technical auxiliary cold storage used in summer." But when compared to the current map that Gabriel had seen in the diocesan archives, this room had been erased. Not only erased, but the structure of the surrounding walls had been adjusted, making anyone think the place didn't exist. That location was directly beneath the bell tower. Gabriel stood motionless for a long time. Every clue, the 3 bell chimes, the missing map, and that note, all led to one point. Something was being hidden right below the place that was once called the heart of the convent. He followed the hallway towards the bell tower. The door leading in had been bricked up, but a small crack still let in light. Gabriel bent down and shone through. On the other side, a spiral staircase led down, lost in the darkness. He returned to the library and took a crowbar from the corner of the old tool room. The door didn't open easily, but with a few strong pushes, the bricks loosened and dusty mortar fell all over his clothes. Gabriel pulled hard, creating a gap wide enough to squeeze through. The bell tower was now a dark, damp mass. On the wall, he saw scratches running down as if pulled by fingernails, faint but unmistakable. At the bottom of the stairs, the stone floor had a small iron door almost completely covered with mud. As he bent down, the flashlight beam stopped on a dark stain next to the door hinge. Gabriel reached out and touched it. The adhesive was dry, rough, like sand mixed with iron filings. But right next to it, there were parallel lines, even fingernails, or someone scratching while trying to hold on to something. He swallowed hard. He placed his hand on the scratch, feeling the cold through his skin. It wasn't clear if it was because of the time or something else, but Gabriel was certain this door had been opened and someone had been down there. The wind outside gusted, causing the door above to crash into the wall. The resounding noise startled him, and he turned back. The flashlight beam went astray. For a moment, he thought he saw a white shadow flit past the base of the bell tower, but when he shone the light back, there was nothing, just dust and silence. Gabriel sat down next to the stone door. His heart was still beating fast. He wasn't afraid of ghosts, but for the first time in his priesthood he felt very clearly the presence of something that no longer belonged to the earthly world but hadn't gone anywhere yet. He took the Bible out of his pocket. He placed it on his knees, looked up at the dilapidated dome above, and read softly, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Gabriel knew he couldn't dig into the earth alone, not only because of his physical strength, but also because the silence in this place demanded a witness, someone who knew it wasn't just stone walls and desert wind. He remembered a name that the villagers had mentioned, old Vicente, the stonemason who had built the Santa Lucía bell tower. The only person who had seen the original blueprint with his own eyes. Vicente didn't say anything during the 2 hours of digging. It wasn't until the iron door was completely revealed that he sighed, wiped his forehead with a cloth, and said quietly, "I used to fence off this place, not because I wanted to, but because of orders." Gabriel turned to look at him. Orders? From whom? Vicente didn't answer immediately. He picked up a bottle of water, took a sip, then spoke, his voice worn and broken like grindstone. "At that time they said there was an old tunnel that wasn't safe, but I used to hear sounds from down there, tapping, not clear, but regular for a long time. After that, nothing." Between the two, no one said anything more. not because of embarrassment, but because something heavier than words was hovering. Gabriel bent down, took the flashlight, and shone it on the door hinge. There were dents, very old, circular, as if struck from the inside. He carefully pulled the lever. This time the door yielded a little, making a long screech like a hoarse breath from a rusted throat. The smell of mildew hit him straight in the face. Not the smell of death, but the smell of something that had lived for too long under the darkness. Vicente didn't follow. He stood back, gripping the shovel handle, his eyes looking behind Gabriel as if reminding something invisible. "I'll be here. You go in there alone. The light is running out of battery. Remember to come back if you have trouble breathing." Gabriel nodded and stepped through the narrow door. The ground below sloped down, rough with rocks, and the deeper he went, the weaker the light from outside became, until only the pale yellow flashlight beam flickered on the cold, dripping walls. Each step he took echoed lonely sounds. On both sides were narrow hallways, low ceilings, moss speckled on the rock walls. In the corner of the wall, he saw a white spot. He bent down. It was a small candle stub that had burned out, wax spilling to the edge. This couldn't be a trace of the distant past. It was a sign of someone who had used it only recently. But who lit a fire here? Gabriel went deeper. There was a fork to the left, was a collapsed wall to the right, was the path leading to the second iron door, almost completely rusted shut. On the door between the dust were deep, even circular dents. He reached out to touch it, just as Vicente had said someone had tapped. Many times, many times. Right below the handle, a small line of text was carved with a hard object trembling but clear. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Gabriel read silently, his lips moving with each word like someone reciting a prayer. Then he took a deep breath and pushed the door. It didn't open completely, but it was just enough for him to squeeze into the small room behind. The flashlight beam shone on the grey, moss-covered wall. The smell here was different, stronger, with a slight metallic and burnt taste. In the corner of the room were old iron boxes stacked on top of each other. He shone closer boxes of military rations printed faintly with the words 2003, last inspection. On the left wall, the light swept across an iron bed frame, one leg broken, leaning towards the rock wall as if pulled down by the gravity of time. The fabric covering the headboard was mouldy with black patches casting shadows like dried bloodstains. Gabriel moved slowly each step, as if wading into a different atmosphere where even the wind didn't want to touch. At the end of the bed, a still figure, small, thin, curled up as if the darkness itself wanted to swallow it. No sound, no movement, just the clear feeling that life was still there, waiting to be seen or waiting to disappear completely. Gabriel froze for a few seconds. His hand gripped the flashlight tightly, the light shaking slightly as if the light itself didn't want to shine directly on the truth waiting at the end of the room. He stepped forward. The figure was a woman so thin that she was just skin and bones, her long hair tangled covering her face. She sat curled up her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees as if trying to withdraw from the world. Gabriel stopped. His voice was almost a whisper. "Sister Noemí." The figure didn't react immediately, but then from within the matted hair a slight movement. Her head lifted slightly, a pair of cloudy eyes, seemingly not knowing light for too long. And from her dry, cracked mouth she murmured, "Finally, someone has come." Gabriel took another step, his hand reaching out slowly. "I'm Gabriel, your student, when I was little." But as soon as his hand neared her shoulder, Sister Noemí bolted up, backing against the wall, her hands raised to cover her head. Her mouth let out a weak scream, but it was chilling. "Matteo is still here. He's not dead. He'll be back. He knows the entrance." Gabriel quickly withdrew his hand, bowing. "No, no one is coming back. He's not here anymore. You're safe. Sister Noemí, listen to me." But she didn't hear. She repeated Matteo's name like an old reflex, like a haunted child, her lips trembling, her eyes lost. Gabriel sat down, not approaching anymore. He put the flashlight on the ground so that the light shone diagonally up to the tunnel ceiling, like a small glow for someone who had just escaped from a 2-decade-long night. In that moment, he understood. Not everyone is ready to be saved. Some people have lived in the darkness for so long that the light becomes a threat. Behind him, Mr. Vicente's voice echoed down from the mouth of the tunnel. "Gabriel, do you need me to call someone?" Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He was still looking at the woman, huddled in the corner where the cold cellar used to be, now the last refuge of a soul that hadn't been answered. He replied softly, "Yes, please call a doctor." The doctors couldn't believe she was alive. Her body was severely emaciated, her eyes blurred by prolonged darkness, her fingernails broken off, her skin clinging to the bone. She was given intravenous fluids continuously for 3 days, still not saying a word, because she was still too weak to speak once more. Every time a nurse entered, she only tilted her head to listen to the footsteps, then closed her eyes as if measuring between reality and illusion. Gabriel visited every afternoon, bringing nothing but the old Bible. He didn't ask questions, he just sat. On the 5th day, she opened her eyes longer. On the 6th day, she took his hand, her fingers so weak that he didn't feel the force. Just a touch meant, "I know you're here." On the 8th day, after eating her first spoonful of soup, she looked directly at Gabriel, her eyes dim but still deep as a well, and spoke in a voice like torn thread, broken in places. Sister Noemí's voice was like a torn thread, slow and broken. That Lent was the time he waited for. He knew we weren't allowed to speak. He knew in silence no one would hear any cries. Gabriel sat next to her, not writing anything down, just listening, not interrupting. He knew that those memories shouldn't be cut off. They had to rise up on their own like water breaking through a dam after 20 years of being blocked. In 1995, Santa Lucía entered the Lenten retreat with an atmosphere as if time had stopped. Every door was closed, the watch bells ringing regularly every 6 hours. The nuns moved in absolute silence, no talking, no using signs, and for the first time, according to new orders, even eye contact was restricted. The one who issued those rules was Bishop Matteo Tellez, at that time carrying the title of Short Rest, after serving for a while in a southern province of Argentina. But no one asked any further questions, because he came with a letter of introduction and supreme supervisory authority of canon law. Matteo didn't shout, he didn't slam the table, but his presence made the convent a few degrees colder. He walked lightly in his jet black robes, his eyes watching everything, every sister sweeping the yard, every serving of food in the kitchen, every expense report left on Sister Elena's table. Sister Alma, the Mother Superior, noticed the first discrepancies, an expense of buying materials to repair the roof appeared while the roof was still leaking. A package of medical supplies sponsored from Europe didn't reach the medical room. The books were rewritten by hand, fresh ink on old paper. Alma wrote letters. Not one but 3 were sent to the diocese to the Superior General of the Female Order. She put the letters in sealed envelopes and placed them on the library table to be transferred via the internal church mail. 3 days later, Matteo appeared in her room for the first time without knocking. "The convent needs peace in Lent," he said, holding 3 unopened envelopes. "God doesn't need more doubts, just trust." Alma didn't answer. But after that day, her personal diary, the notebook still placed under her pillow, was lost. Sister Eleanor's filing cabinet was locked with a new lock. No one had the key except Matteo. Noemí was still young at that time, full of the spirit of an old student. She didn't like Matteo, especially after a Bible study when he lectured on Leviticus and the verse, "God will cleanse his people with blood and silence." She spoke up, even though she was supposed to be silent at that time. Our God doesn't need blood to forgive, he only needs repentance. Matteo just turned to look at her. No reaction, not a word. But from then on, his eyes were always present where she appeared. The last week of Lent, when everything seemed to be settled. After the night prayer lasting until midnight, no lights, no fire, only the sound of rosary beads echoing evenly. Matteo personally brought everyone a cup of recovering herbal tea. The tea tasted of mint and ginger, but stronger than usual. Noemí drank half a cup. Elena drank all of it because she had a headache. Alma sipped a little. Marta refused, but was required to follow the regular ritual. None of them knew inside was a mild sedative, just enough not to cause a strong reaction, but enough to make a person tired after prayer easily lose consciousness. The next morning, no one was cooking in the kitchen. The beds in the 4 nuns' rooms were all empty, but the belongings were still there. The robes were folded neatly. The Bible was placed open at Psalm 88, a hymn of lamentation in the darkness. "You have put me in the lowest pit, in the deepest darkness." The first to discover was a young sister named Lucia, but she didn't say anything. No one said anything. Matteo, who was celebrating Mass at that time, only said one sentence: "Whoever leaves during the silent season, I don't hold them back, because that is their freedom." The convent fell into silence. No police report, no diocesan report. 4 people disappeared right in the season when no one was allowed to speak. "I woke up and was already down there." Noemí's voice faded. "I don't remember exactly. Each person was locked in a different room. Elena called my name, and no one said anything to us for the first 11 days. Gabriel nodded slightly. He didn't ask further, not urging, because every word Noemí spoke was a brick falling from the wall built from silence. "He chose the right time," she added. "When the whole world in the convent was bowing before God, he built a hell that no one was allowed to look down on and pushed us into it." Gabriel closed his eyes. He had lived in faith but never imagined that one day he would have to hear that precisely in faith, a person in God's name would quietly bind the most devoted people and release them into a place with no light, no time, no language. Noemí tilted her head, her cloudy eyes looking out the hospital window. Lent is to prepare the heart to welcome the light. But we were buried again in hell, and that light never came. No torture, no blood. He didn't need weapons. Noemí stopped her eyes absent-mindedly, looking at the snow-white hospital wall, the white brightness that made her blink continuously since being rescued. He only needed 3 things: time, darkness, and the absolute absence of any human sound. The stone cellar under Santa Lucía wasn't exactly a prison cell. No chains, no wrist locks, just cold, small rooms sealed like the heart of a wooden coffin buried under the ground. The walls were so thick that the sound of footsteps above was just a faint vibration, like a person's heart throbbing. Matteo wasn't present much, but his absence ironically was precisely how he was most present. Each week the small crack in the door would open and a burlap bag would be pushed through. Inside was bottled water, a few boxes of dry rations, and sometimes a piece of bread as dry as stone. No messages, no greetings, just the minimum material to keep the body from dying immediately. Each person was given a Bible. No light, no candles. They had to memorize each sentence, each passage, then read it repeatedly in their minds to keep track of the days. Matteo required each person to write a confession on the last white page of the book, a form of purifying the soul before being forgiven. Sister Elena wrote little. She used to be an accountant, careful and not easily led. But sometimes her hand trembled from lack of salt, and the handwriting gradually slanted as if sinking. Marta wrote a lot, not because of repentance, but because her mind would explode if she didn't write. She recounted dreams, recorded the days passing, based on new cracks on the wall, or the sound of water dripping from the pipes above. Noemí kept the habit of carving. When the paper ran out, she used her fingernails to carve on the wall the verse she believed in the most: El Señor es mi pastor, nada me falta. One sentence for many weeks. When her fingernails broke, she used a small piece of aluminum. When that piece was gone, she used the edge of the ration box lid. That verse in the darkness was her breath, a reminder that there was still someone listening. Matteo didn't let them know the day or night. But according to the sound cycle, every 12th cycle after the food was supplied, he turned on the speaker. The speaker was mounted on the ceiling, connected from an old cassette player above. His voice echoed like the lecture in the chapel, but repeated, "Silence is the door to heaven. Whoever is still afraid of the darkness doesn't have enough faith. You are trapped by your own pride, but you will be opened if you learn to obey like children." Sister Alma, who used to manage the entire convent, sat in the corner, not reacting. She was the oldest, and her health was deteriorating rapidly. Sometimes she would just sit and repeat one word, "Order, order," as if trying to remember a report that had been torn apart. One day, the sound from the room next door disappeared. Noemí called softly through the crack, "Marta." No answer. Then 3 hours later, there was a clanging sound like a heavy object hitting metal. That morning, if it could be called morning, the metallic smell spread to Noemí's room. None of the remaining 3 said anything. They just sat waiting for the next supply cycle. When the crack opened, there was no longer Marta's food box. Just a small box, empty. The next day, or 12 cycles later, no one was sure the speaker started up again. Matteo's voice echoed slower than usual. "Sister Marta has been called home. Don't let your sister's death be in vain. Pray more carefully. Don't try to climb." No one cried. No one screamed. Because tears need salt, and their bodies had drained all of it from the first weeks. The silence there wasn't like the silence of the convent during prayer. It clung to the throat, crawled into every breath like a rough cloth wrapped around the head of a dying person. When Sister Alma fell down for the first time, No one cried out. When Sister Eleanor coughed up blood, there was only a small sound like a mosquito bursting in the night. Even when Sister Marta climbed up the air vent and fell, the impact echoed with a dry thud. No one screamed. Because of fear, maybe. But deeper than fear was the clear realization that there was no one to listen. No one was coming. No one knew. And therefore all sounds became meaningless, like trying to call out one's name in a dream without being able to make a sound. Noemí shuddered as she recounted that part. Her voice was as dry as stone eroded by the wind. She tried to climb up the ventilation shaft. I don't know how she found the rope or if it was with her bare hands. But she fell down. We couldn't get to her. Each person was locked separately. We could only hear, we couldn't see. Matteo. He took the body away in a wheelbarrow. He didn't say anything. He just turned on the speaker. And his voice was still even like every Sunday. Gabriel didn't record. He sat silently, his hand gripping the rosary beads tightly. In his head echoed the verse, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But in that stone cellar, those women not only lacked, but were stripped of every layer of faith, every nerve that kept them as themselves. Noemí turned her eyes different, no longer panicked, just tired, yearning. "We are not martyrs," she said. "We are witnesses. And the world needs to see us not with pity, but with anger." Behind the hospital door, the hallway loudspeaker announced visiting hours. But inside, no one stood up. No one hurried. 3 burials, Noemí continued to whisper, as if reading the minutes of a ceremony that no one witnessed. No coffin, no mass, just the sound of earth falling into burlap, and he still called it grace. Gabriel sat there unmoving, not just out of pity, but because he knew there was something sacred in keeping silent at the right time, as if an extra sound could cause the memory to collapse. In the 2nd year, Sister Alma passed away. Her heart had been weak before. No medicine, no rest, no air enough to take a deep breath. One morning her breathing stopped so light that you had to listen very carefully to realize that silence was permanent. Matteo came at food distribution time. He didn't look at anyone in the remaining 3. He just bent down, wrapped Sister Alma in burlap, and placed her on the wheelbarrow. The wheels squeaked through the stone hallway, then disappeared after the sound of the hinges closing. The speaker turned on an hour later. Sister Alma has been released from her body. Let us pray that her soul will no longer resent. In the 11th year, winter came like a slow, blood-draining shadow. Eleanor coughed for 3 weeks. No warm blankets, no medicine. Her breath echoed in bursts, intermittent. One evening she called softly, "Noemí, are you still there?" and received only the sound of small animals rustling through the crack in the wall. That night, Eleanor wrote with a black piece of charcoal on a broken brick, "God still listens, but he doesn't answer." 4 days later, Matteo came again. This time he was wearing a leather jacket. No longer in robes. He didn't read scripture, no lectures. He just cleaned up neatly as if cleaning a warehouse. After that, there was no speaker, no sound. He disappeared. Noemí waited 3 days, then 7 days. The crack in the door didn't open. The red light on the wall, the sign to announce the speaker, was no longer lit. No more preaching. No more simulated bells every hour of prayer. He had left, leaving no sign that he would return, not a word, not acknowledging that she was still alive, not giving her a sentence, nor giving her a clear way to die, just leaving her like an unfinished exercise. Those next 3 years were as long as eternity, like a sprawling mud puddle, no edge, no bottom, never knowing when to stop. Noemí couldn't remember how many times she had woken up in the middle of the night or in the non-night, non-day, with the feeling of being buried in her own chest. The air in the tunnel was sometimes thick, sometimes as cold as rusted metal, causing her lungs to constrict into spasms. Each time she lay on her side, her hand clinging to the cold wall, counting her heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. If her heart was still beating, it meant it wasn't time to die yet. Her stomach was no longer hungry, but contracted in waves, as if her internal organs were trying to eat themselves. Sometimes she thought she was about to dissolve into a foul odor. Once, when she found a small piece of glass stuck in the crack of the stone, perhaps fallen from a broken lamp from 10 years ago, she saw her own reflection. Bony face, yellow teeth, her hair falling out in clumps, leaving a sparse patch like cold ashes. In the early days, she tried to pray regularly, counting rosary beads, singing softly. But gradually, the prayers also dissolved like smoke, and only the single sentence was repeated, almost an obsession. El Señor es mi pastor. She thought about Alma, the strict old mother she had never called mother. Thought about Elena, the last cough still echoing in her head. And Marta, who dared to climb up when all the others only knew how to kneel. There was no wind, no birds, but occasionally she could hear the sound of wind howling from somewhere far away through the dilapidated ventilation system, like someone calling her name through layers of earth and stone, and she clung to that sound, even though she knew it might just be a hallucination. But that was all. Was the only reason not to lie down and stop breathing, was the last thing between her and absolute darkness. Each day, if it could be called that, she still whispered one word, someone will come back. It didn't have to be an angel, just a person, a priest, a former student, someone who remembered her like a piece of memory that hadn't rotted. And when Gabriel's flashlight shone into that corner when he called Noemí like a child calling a sister in the old schoolyard, she wasn't overjoyed. Just strange. Like an old wound being cut again, not to hurt, but to confirm that the wound had been real. Telling this, Noemí rested her head on the pillow, her voice lowered like a candle burning close to the bottom. If you hadn't come, maybe I would have followed those 3 next week. The heart would stop beating in silence. She turned her head, looking towards the window where the afternoon sun shone through the curtains. But God doesn't forget, even if he is too silent. But justice hadn't been served even when it was right before her eyes. Gabriel stood in front of the internal conference room door of the diocese, as if standing before a silent court. Above the door was the symbol of the dark wooden cross. Inside were men in black robes, their heads bowed under the dim light. As he entered, the sound of footsteps echoed hollowly. As in a stone cellar, no one looked up. The current bishop, a tall, thin man, his eyes under thick glasses, looked at him once. No greeting, no questions, only whispered through his breath, "Are you sure? This should be dug up." Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He placed a file on the table, a copy of the old architectural design, a photo of young Sister Noemí, and a photo of the military food storage that he had taken when he opened the tunnel with Mr. Vicente. He slowly pushed the file forward, then answered in a calm voice, "Your Excellency, I'm not digging anything up. I'm just returning names to those who were buried without a grave. The bishop stopped flipping through the file, but his eyes didn't linger on any page for long. "You know," he said, his voice even lower. Even though he was given a break, Pastor Matteo is still revered in many places. People write letters asking about his health. There are parishes he has saved from closing. He used to lecture in Rome, respected by scholars. Now, if you make this a big deal, everything will fall into our hands like a wound that won't stop bleeding. Gabriel bit his lips slightly, holding back the rising breath. He understood this wasn't just a meeting. This was a veiled warning that what he touched wasn't just a hidden truth, but also the blood vessels of power. No one wants to turn the face of someone who used to preach about salvation. The bishop continued, closing the file as if closing a door. And when you do that, many people will think you are opposing the church. Gabriel interrupted for the first time in the meeting. If salvation needs to hide the bodies of the living, then that is not salvation. That is an unforgivable crime. After the meeting, no announcement was made. But the unspoken order was there. Every parish in the area was reminded not to report or teach anything related to the Santa Lucía incident. A few old friends avoided him in the church hallway. An anonymous letter was placed under the door of his room. "Parish priest Gabriel, there are tunnels that should be closed, not opened." He burned the letter in front of the chapel door. On the way out of the diocesan headquarters, Gabriel walked down the hallway with portraits of the previous bishops hanging in a row. Their eyes, painted in somber tones, seemed to be cast down on him in unison. No faces were familiar, but there was something in the way each portrait stared straight ahead, unblinking, that made him feel like he was walking past a long line of people who had been silent, who had known, and who had chosen to stand still. He stopped in front of a painting darker than the rest. Below it read, "Matteo Tellez Canon Law Supervisor Special Term, 1995. No end date, no change of location note, just simply hung there, like a ghost." That evening, Gabriel returned to his room, opened the copy of Sister Alma's diary that Noemí had recited by heart. There was a page that she only remembered half of, then interrupted because the rest was torn. But he knew why. Because on the remaining half, there was a sentence scrawled in smeared ink. "If this letter doesn't reach the superiors, find where Matteo stayed after Ash Wednesday." Shh. A clumsy sentence, perhaps in panic. But for Gabriel, it was the last trace and proof that Sister Alma had not been silent, even though her words had fallen into nothingness. The first person to come looking for Gabriel wasn't a priest, but a middle-aged woman wearing a grey sweater and carrying an old brown leather briefcase. She introduced herself briefly. "Ana Lujan, civil lawyer. I used to work with abuse victims in Buenos Aires, and I know Matteo's name from old records." Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Finally, there was someone who wasn't afraid of losing their reputation, who didn't belong to the old power system, but who only wanted the right thing to be said. "I volunteer to represent Sister Noemí," Anna said. "Not for money, not for abstract justice, but because if she survived all those years, then at least we mustn't let her scream into the void again." Gabriel sat down opposite her, took out the old map, along with photos of the prison tunnel and a digitized tape recording from the old cassette. "They want to cover everything up," he said. "But if I'm silent, then how am I different from Matteo?" And so they began. A priest who was no longer protected, a lawyer outside the system, a woman who had been imprisoned. 3 people standing before a wall of silence, but this time they brought hammers. When the information leaked to the press, initially small lines in a supplement about a nun who miraculously survived after 2 decades of imprisonment, the online community began to share it at breakneck speed. An independent newspaper interviewed the nurse caring for Sister Noemí, saying that she had never seen anyone survive with such nutrition and physical condition while still being lucid enough to recount clearly. Gabriel, instead of avoiding, chose to appear publicly on a televised prayer. He didn't name names but emphasized, "There are places that used to be holy ground, now are graves. And there are souls who were buried alive now are coming out to testify." That same week, an envelope was sent to him, no sender address. Inside was a copy of an article from Buenos Aires dated June 1982. The title was small but clear: "Faith Training Program Disbanded After Allegations of Illegal Imprisonment." In the middle of the article, the name Mateo Tellez appeared along with a note, "Reassigned after the incident, not prosecuted due to lack of concrete evidence." Gabriel read that far, his hand gripping the edge of the newspaper tightly, his eyes closed. There was no doubt this wasn't the first imprisonment. And that time he escaped. But this time, there was a survivor. There was someone who remembered. And there was light that had crept into the bottom of the tunnel. And justice needed to be served. Just a week after the cassette tape went viral on social media, with Mateo's formulaic preaching and fanatical language confirmed to match the voice in the old canon law records, a wave of outrage swept across Catholic communities in Latin America and Europe. Many groups of believers sent open letters requesting an independent investigation. Some young monks withdrew from the order as a form of protest against the cover-up. Finally, the New Mexico State Police were forced to intervene. A search warrant was issued urgently. Mateo's personal assets, including a small house in the suburbs and an old account that had received donations from Europe, were all frozen. When arrested, he didn't resist. He just quietly packed his mass books into a bag and walked out of the house as if onto the podium. At the police station, he still called himself Pastor Mateo, and when signing the detention papers, he even added the line, "Fiat voluntas tua, thy will be done." However, at the hearing, he was no longer allowed to control the atmosphere. The white lights on the ceiling, the media cameras, the silent gaze of Sister Noemí in the back row all made it impossible for him to sit like a lecturer anymore. And even though he wasn't handcuffed or escorted, everything in the room had shifted from respect to judgment. The white room of the court had no scent, no wind, only the sound of shoes echoing each step as Mateo entered, carrying his mass books, his bishop's robes carefully ironed as if this was a holy consecration rather than a hearing. He nodded to greet both the representative of the diocese and the representative of the civil court, then sat down, placed his hands on the table, uncuffed. No one escorted him. The first sentence he said was, "I didn't kill anyone." A civil lawyer, grey hair, thin glasses, opened the file, placing the pen down as a fixed ritual. "So you admit to imprisoning people?" Mateo didn't blink. "I kept them in solitude like the saints who used to retreat. I didn't force anyone. I gave them a path of purification. No light, no adequate food, no medical care, and people died in that condition." The lawyer emphasized each word. "You call that purification?" Mateo smiled the smile of someone who had once been believed to be a saint. God doesn't save mankind with comfort, but with suffering. Gabriel sat in the back, his hands clasped tightly, his fingers so cold that he lost feeling. He knew that voice, the voice that had been coming from the old speaker for 17 years, repeating a twisted doctrine. The lawyer changed her tone softer. "We have a cassette tape, your voice, saying that the test of silence is a form of eternal atonement. Do you deny it?" Matteo looked at the camera lens. "I don't deny it. I've taught that for dozens of years, and everyone who listened found comfort. Only those with weak faith call it sin." The tape was played. In the static, Matteo's voice echoed, "He who does not endure solitude is not worthy of light. For light is only for those who overcome darkness with silence." That sentence made many people in the room hold their breath because it sounded like an execution order for innocent souls. The press representative waved his hand. A reporter stood up, holding up a file. "Regarding assets, do you deny that property number 17 Vereda del Sur Street, the villa in Spain, was bought in 1997 with charitable funds sent from the European Caritas Council through Sister Elena's account?" Matteo looked directly at the reporter. No answer, no nod, nor shake. He only turned to the representative of the diocese as a silent signal. The current bishop took a deep breath. For the first time, he stood up. His voice trembled not with anger, but like someone forced to break a stone wall that he had leaned on all his life. "The Church does not tolerate criminals, even if that person wears robes, even if that person used to teach the Bible." Then he withdrew from the hearing, leaving the public in an uproar behind him. The atmosphere in the room changed. The doorkeeper quietly locked the back door. The press immediately reported the hot news. The Church officially withdraws from protecting Matteo Tellez. Matteo still didn't change his posture, as if he had anticipated this could happen. When the session was adjourned, he was invited to leave his seat. On the way past Gabriel, he nodded slightly, whispering, "You think she survived thanks to God?" His voice was soft, as if asking about the old days. Then he continued, "No. It was thanks to me that I let her live. You won't understand." Gabriel didn't answer, but in his head that sentence didn't echo like a self-defense, but like the last voice of a man who had just lost the right to define light and was claiming to be darkness. The verdict was announced in the silent room. Matteo Tellez was convicted of 3 main charges: illegal imprisonment for an extended period, manslaughter due to neglecting the victims, and abuse of power in a religious environment. The sentence of 36 years in federal prison with no early parole was clearly recorded. No one in the room applauded or shouted. Only the sound of the judge's signature echoed evenly, and a slight nod from Ana Luyan. Sister Noemí sat in the back, not bowing her head, not shedding tears. When Matteo turned back, his eyes no longer had a challenging glint, just a blurred space like a candle that had burned to the heart of the wick. A few weeks later, the diocese issued an official announcement. The Santa Lucía convent would be completely demolished. No renovation, no turned into a memorial, not keeping a single brick. The reason was recorded briefly: to avoid mental harm to the religious community. But everyone understood. No one wanted to step into the place that had once been holy ground, then become hell. The excavator knocked the last stone wall down into a pile of rubble. Dust flew white and blurry across the front yard of the old chapel. Under the glass cover of the hard hat, the engineer driving the machine tried not to look at the statue of the Virgin Mary with a broken arm now being pulled down at an angle. A few parishioners knelt on the side of the road, their hands on the rosary beads, not to pray, but to say goodbye to something that no longer existed. Sister Noemí stood in the distance, her shoulders covered with a dark shawl, her eyes unblinking, looking towards the sound of metal grinding stone. No tears fell. She gripped her hands so tightly that her knuckles were white. Next to her, a female lawyer intended to say something, but in the end just quietly raised her hand to block the sun. They watched a part of history being destroyed by a heavy engine, a cruel but unavoidable liberation. When the engine stopped, the media representative of the diocese stepped out in front of the camera. He read the apology statement that had been written carefully, his voice steady, each word chosen carefully. But the sobbing from the crowd drowned out his words. "You used to tell us to believe. Who do we have to believe in now?" Rome sent a fax. A full investigation was ordered in the dioceses that had been visited by a supervisor named Matteo Tellez. Convents in Argentina, Peru, Italy, that had been closed without reason were asked to dig through the original records. Many documents were lost, but what remained was enough to suggest a network of spiritual isolation that had been operated as a silent system based on absolute obedience and lack of cross-checking. Gabriel didn't participate in the demolition ceremony. When asked, he only submitted a copy of his resignation letter without giving a reason. In a letter to friends, he wrote simply, "I am no longer able to stand and preach and say that I understand the word." Instead of preaching, he wrote, "The book, The Bell in the Night, was completed in a small room at the old San Juan convent where there was no bell tower, no echoes." The first word he wrote was the names of the 3 who had died, and the last word was listen. He recounted the journey not as an indictment, but as a silent mass, each step following the traces of burnt candles, fingernail marks on the walls, each piece of memory that Sister Noemí recalled in the throes of post-traumatic stress. He didn't use the word crime too much, but every page echoed the question, what have we heard and ignored? After the demolition, a small group of young people in the area, who were former students of the sisters, quietly gathered the broken bricks from the old bell tower. They didn't speak, didn't share with the press, just exchanged one sentence. Each of these stones is a bell that has never been rung. Some buried them in the backyard, others kept them as talismans, not to ward off demons, but to remind themselves never to forget. On social media, a campaign spread with the hashtag Noemí todavía vive as a symbol of resistance against silence. Thousands of people shared memories of forgotten monks' cases swept under the rug in the darkness of abused faith. Many publicly told for the first time in their lives about being hurt in the name of purification. An elderly parishioner who used to be the head of the liturgy committee at Santa Lucía called the local radio station, his voice trembling, "We weren't blind, we saw, but thought it was God's will. Now I can only hope that God forgives my turning away." The program host didn't cut him off. They let him speak until the end, and when it was over, there were more than 200 messages sent just to say, "We used to think like you too." On the memorial day for Sister Alma Mater and Eleanor, the El Campo chapel was packed. Everyone was wearing black. Everyone put a white candle in front of them. But only one person didn't shed tears, Sister Noemí. She sat in the back, straight back, her hands on her knees, her mouth closed, not because she wasn't sad, but because her tears had fallen enough for a lifetime in the tunnel in the dark for the 3 sisters who used to sing hymns together. At the end of the Mass, when Gabriel was invited to read a few lines from the book, he turned to the last page, his voice as light as a breeze from afar. "I no longer hear the sound of bells, but I believe in the hearts of those who have survived that sound still echoes. We must learn to listen, not with our ears, but with our conscience." The entire chapel was silent. Then no one knew who started. Everyone stood up together, candles still burning in their hands. No one applauded. No one said anything. But in that moment, something echoed not from the bell tower, but from within each person. The small auditorium of the Psychology Theology Department of San Miguel Catholic University had no lectern, no glass podium, no church flags. The rows of low seats covered in silver-grey cushions quietly welcomed each step into the symposium, Faith After Collapse. The front row had a few young people holding notebooks. A middle-aged woman sat in the right corner with eyes constantly darting around as if searching for memories that she had tried to hide. The person who stepped up wasn't wearing robes. She wore a brown sweater, a long black skirt past her knees, a thin silk scarf around her neck, no badges, no crosses. Her voice was calm as she introduced, "I am Noemí Diaz. Today I come here as someone who has lived in darkness for more than a quarter of a century, but now I don't tell the story to seek pity. I tell it to live among those who still breathe." The atmosphere in the auditorium wasn't as lively as usual, but one by one, as they heard her begin to talk about the concept of forgiveness without denying the harm, they leaned forward. She didn't tell the details of the past, just used metaphors. "Sometimes I thought God was a locked door, but then I realized sometimes He's the only one still sitting on the other side of that door waiting for me not to give up." A young student, curly hair, his hand shaking as he held the microphone, asked, "Did you ever lose your faith?" She looked at him, her eyes not avoiding but not rushing to answer. "I lost faith in those who used God's name to control others," she replied. "But God never forgot me. It's just that He was so silent for so long that I had to learn to listen with my own solitude." After the workshop, a female student approached her holding a thick textbook. "I used to think if I said what I went through, people would think I was making it up. But now I understand. There are wounds that only survivors recognize each other." Noemí didn't answer immediately. She just placed her hand lightly on the person's shoulder. No words needed. Because she knew sometimes silent presence is more powerful than a lecture. The presentation ended not with applause but with a very long silence. She didn't smile. But as she closed the documents, she read one last passage in a deep, hoarse but clear voice, like metal bells ringing in sleep. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for God is with me. His rod and His staff comfort me." That was Psalm 22, the prayer she had read thousands of times alone in the unlit stone tunnel. In her spare time, Noemí volunteered at a psychological counseling center for people who had been hurt in a religious environment. She didn't use the titles sister or doctor. She just introduced herself as someone who knew how to listen. She taught a small class called Theories of Hope. In it, there was one section, Rebuilding Faith Without Idols. Gabriel sent her the re-edition of the book, The Bell in the Night. In the first page, there was a line of handwriting leaning slightly, "To the one who taught me that faith is not to win. Faith is to survive, to prove that the truth doesn't need to shout to exist." That evening, Noemí returned to her small rented apartment near the university. On the low wooden altar, 3 black and white photos were framed, Alma Mater Elena, along with a small candle. She lit the candle, then opened the window. The wind blew through the curtains, gently hitting the beads hanging on the frame, making a faint tinkling sound like memories that wouldn't sleep. She didn't turn her head, just leaned her forehead against the wall, her eyes closed. While cleaning up the old notes, she found an unsent letter in the paper file written to Sister Elena, which she wrote in the 15th year in the tunnel. The slanted handwriting, written with a piece of charcoal, "Do you think people will remember us?" She sat motionless for a long time before the paper. Then she took a pen and wrote underneath, "You don't need anyone to remember. You existed, and that is enough." In the last page of her diary that she wrote that night, just one line, no punctuation. "God didn't save me with his miracle so I could wait because he knew someone would come back." You must have felt something was wrong, but then been silent because no one else spoke up, or because of the fear of being questioned, being denied. The story of Sister Noemí parish priest Gabriel and the Santa Lucía convent is not just a memory that has been unearthed, but a reminder that darkness never disappears on its own if no one enters. We retell this story based on many real events records that have been forgotten, investigations that have been suspended, testimonies that have never been read in newspapers. Names of characters, locations, and some details have been changed to protect the identity of those who have survived. But the pain, the silence, and the journey to find justice are all true. If you have read this far, perhaps you also believe that not all wounds are invisible. Some things just need to be retold so that someone no longer feels like they are the only one bearing that pain. Share this story via WhatsApp to a friend, someone who has been confused in faith, or simply someone who has been forced to be silent. Perhaps you will be the reason someone finds the courage to tell their story. We cannot rewrite history, but we can continue to write so that survivors are no longer forgotten and those who follow don't have to walk in the darkness alone. Send this story. Maybe somewhere someone is waiting to be heard and thereby find the first light of their own.